Submission today that we're going to send off to Beckett Grading. We currently are going to be looking at 16 Michael Jordan cards. What we're going to do is if you see this live, excellent, join us live. If you're watching it later, it'll also be available to view at a later date. What we're going to do is we're going to have kind of a bit of a contest where an individual, if you want to comment in the comment section, there's 16 cards we're going to look at. The question that I'm posing to the audience is how many of the 16 cards that's reviewed today will be a 9.5 or above with Beckett Grading. This is essentially, it's helping to teach myself, it's helping to teach others how well cards will grade out before when we look at them raw. And then 8 to 9 months from now, when it comes back, we'll be able to see which cards actually did get a 9.5 or above. The reason why I'm doing this is I've already sent off over 20 submissions for grading. But where I felt like I could have improved is I could have worked on YouTube with an audience and find out which cards will definitely get a 9.5 and above. I've seen other YouTubers do this and they send off around a selection of 15, maybe 16 cards, and around 12 to 13 were 9.5 and above. So that's essentially the ratio I'm looking for. I'm looking for around 80, 75%. That would be a great return on investment. If you're getting less than 50%, spending, at a minimum $30 a card to be graded, and it's not selling for on eBay, if it's not even selling for $30, you're losing money. So what I'm trying to do is educate an audience, trying to show how the cards I'm sending off will be returned. The first over 20 batches that I've done, I haven't really been able to have this before and after effect. But I think that's really interesting. It's engaging. Audiences can look at some of these cards that I'm going to send off. They can create their own opinion. I do want it to be noted that I'm not a financial professional, an investing professional. Anything that I do, it's kind of, I want you to create your own opinion. I want you to do your own research. If you're in a financial strain, I don't want to be pushing or advising in any way. This is, take kind of my point of view, take your point of view, create your own. Don't kind of fall into any one point of view. Get a large scope of it. And that way, I'm covering my bases. I'm not persuading anyone to make any decisions. I'm just saying, hey, here's what I'm doing. Let's try to take an honest look at how many of these cards will grade out at 9.5 and above with the Beckett sports grading option, and have a little fun with it. I do have gloves on for this video. You might have seen a previous video where I do, once that I don't. With these hologram cards, they're a little bit easier to add fingerprints to. So I do want to have a little bit more protective. So you can kind of already see that this surface on this card, it may have flaws to it. I want you to kind of create your own opinion on it though. I want you to look at the edges. I want you to look at the corners. So this is card number 1 of the holograms that I'll be sending off. This is a 92-93 upper deck. I'll give full disclosure. I bought this card for $10 at a store in the Denver area. So I bought this, raw for 10. If it grades out, let's say a 9, maybe 9.5, it will increase the value, possibly $75, $100, maybe up to $150. So it'll be a great return on investment. Now, let's say the card grades out at a 8.5, at an 8, worst case scenario, maybe even 7.5. Then I spent $10 on the card, $30 on grading, so there's 40 total. But if it doesn't sell online for, let's say it sells for 15, I'm essentially out $25. So that's in a way why I want to do these kind of videos. I want people to understand, hey, if I have this card and it's going to cost, at a minimum $30 to grade, how much will it sell for ideally on eBay? And you can look and see what other sales have gone for. You can look and see how the ungraded versus graded material sells out at, and you can make your own decisions. So what I'm trying to do is help myself, help you, help me help you, and have you help me find out which cards are worth grading, which cards should not even be sent to grade. So you can kind of see an imperfection on the surface here near the bull logo. And just a funny side note about the bull logo, you might already know the inside joke about it. For all the audiences watching, I don't need to get into too much detail there, but if you know the inside joke of the bull logo, very good. If you don't, I wouldn't even look it up. You can see some surface damage on this card. So I'm looking at the surface of this and I'm not seeing perfection. I'm not seeing a 10, I'm barely seeing a 9.5. I could even be seeing down to a 9 or an 8.5. So, I could just put this card back in my collection, but I'm going to send it off. All 16 cards I'm going to send off, even with some imperfections. I want to see how Beckett grades these. I've already sent off around 10 hologram cards that came directly out of the package. And even sometimes out of the package, you'll see these kind of imperfections on the surface. We'll see some indentations on some of the next cards. So what you want to do is you want to avoid any imperfections on your cards. So that is card number 1. Take a look at card number 2. '91-92 Upper Deck. This is the MVP edition. So before this video, I took a microfiber fabric kind of cloth, and I cleaned up the surface a little bit. Since this is almost a 20-year-old card, you'll definitely see some imperfections to it. So whenever you buy cards, even when you get them out of the pack, you might see some imperfections. So I did my best to clear up this card as much as possible without making any damages. And the surface doesn't look bad. I do see a spot. Let's see if we can get a good look at that. I do see a spot on the surface, so that might take the surface score down a little bit. The edges and the corners look great. So they're essentially looking at the edges, the corners, the surface, and the centering. Now the centering, if you have several of these cards, and you can see on eBay how well they have graded out at. If you can go to eBay and see several examples of how the card has graded out in the past, you'll be able to make a more accurate prediction on how the card will grade out whenever you send it off. So if we were to go to eBay right now and we were to see, that's a good angle with I call it a flaw on the surface. If we go to eBay and we see several examples of this card, and we can see how the centering might be 1/4 inch, and it graded out at a 9.5. It might be in between 1/8 of an inch. For that logo is a great kind of tool. The newer Prism cards have dots that you can follow, and you can count the dots. For these, you can kind of say to yourself, is that an 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, top to left or right, using logos on these older cards. We'll take a look at the back. In a similar sense, you can use kind of the edges, the white edge, that as a center marker. Is it close to being the same? Is it drastically off? How close is it to perfection? And we can also see right here on the back an imperfection. Almost looks like a kind of a red stain there. So I'm pretty sure that would be an imperfection. This card, those first two cards I look at between an 8.5 and a 9. So they would basically be close to losing money. I'm still going to send these off. I would like to see what happens, but I do want my audience to know whenever you have cards with flaws, you have a high chance of losing money when you send the card off for grading. If the card is close to perfection with no flaws, you have a much better chance at your return on investment being positive. And you can use a magnifying glass to find even more flaws. Right now, we're just kind of using the camera on the cell phone to identify flaws. So with this card, you'll be able to see, I think whenever we rotate it, you'll be able to see some flaws on the surface. There's small indentations. And it could just slightly mark the card down just slightly for the surface score. Now the centering, I could look at some other examples and be able to identify if the centering's good. The edges and the corners all look in excellent 9.5. So they do subgrades with Beckett, which I really like. I like it when they use subgrades to be able to identify when a card has a specific flaw. It might be the surface, it might be the edges. With PSA, they do a lump sum in the score, and I kind of feel like as a die-hard person that loves accuracy, I want to know why the card had an imperfection, why that imperfection didn't score a 9.5 and above. But this card is really close. Like there's some small indentations on the surface. This is the first card I would say that's close to being a 9.5. Now this corner, I would say this corner in the top left may be brought down to a 9. So this might get like 2 or 3 9.5 subgrades and 1 or 2 9 subgrades. So it might be between a 9 and a 9.5. So again, we've spent around $10 a card, $30 to grade. So right now we're at around 120. The return on investment, I'm just estimating 50 to 75. So we've lost around $75 right now. So it is important whenever you send material off that you understand you're taking a risk, that Beckett could grade you lower than obviously a 10, which is what you want. With these cards that I have bought from a secondhand store and haven't pulled them directly out of a fresh pack, there is a higher chance of flaws, of imperfections, of not getting great grades. And that in itself is a great lesson for individuals starting off in the kind of the flipping game of the sports card field. If you go to buy from a secondary market and there are imperfections, Beckett will put this underneath a very close microscope and look for these flaws. So all I'm doing is trying to help educate individuals on how to avoid them. I could have picked, a set of cards that are closer to perfection that I've sent off. But again, I wanted to start with a batch of cards that isn't perfect, that we could identify flaws with, and that we can kind of say, yeah, so far out of these first 4 cards we looked at, one's close to being a 9.5. This card has small indentations as well as I would call it a minor. You can kind of see that surface indentation there. And then if we can kind of zoom in, that corner, perfect. That corner is less than mint condition. It might be a 9 and 8.5 on that corner. The surface, I would give that surface, if I was grading, in between a 9 and 9.5. So far out of the first 4, I think we have one that's close to being a 9.5. The other cards are more close to being 9s. And these hologram cards are a little bit more tricky to get a perfect kind of a flawless score. So they are a great example of when you're looking at something, you want to double check it before you buy it. You want to make sure you get a great return on investment. You don't want to lose money. But you can also just have this in your collection. It might not be about making money. It might just be about storing the card, holding it for several years, letting the value go up, and possibly then doing some grading or some selling. But for me right now, I'm just trying to educate the audience, educate myself. We're looking at this card. I see some imperfections on the surface that would lead me to believe that it would be in between a 9 and a 9.5. The edges, I think there's a slight imperfection on the top right corner. The edges, so this would probably be like a 9. I would give this card around a 9. So out of the first 5 cards, we got probably one close to 9.5. Then we have several others that are in between an 8.5 and a 9. So we've essentially, if we, get that one 9.5, it might be $100. So, 5 cards getting graded at $30 a pop, that's 150. Each of those 5 cards is $10 a piece when you buy them individually. So we're at $200 in cost. What I'm saying is there's a good chance that one of them will maybe grade out at 9.5, resulting in $100 to $150. The other 4 will result in about a $15, maybe up to a $50 sale. So depending on how well they grade out, we may have just broke even. We may be just a little under for that first batch of cards. So again, when you're grading, submitting, you want to possibly just have it for your collection. It doesn't have to be about making money. But if you are in the game of making money, you want to have cards that lack imperfections. This next group of cards is a 1990-91 set of hoops. And you'll see that the surface is going to have far less imperfections. The surface to these cards they won't have those indentations that we were just noticing. What you might see is whenever a card is printed, certain color might be used a little better. The ink might be a little better. What's interesting about this 1990 card is this, I believe it's a light or a banner in the background. And whenever I would first look at these cards, I would think that they had a flaw to them. And then I'd see so many of these 1990-91 hoops cards, I started to realize this back here is not a flaw. It is essentially part of the card. So what I want you to look at here is the centering specifically. So these cards can have great centering, they can have less than ideal centering. So you kind of visualize, you can break out a ruler and start to measure the edge between here and here and here and here. So the great thing about this card is, you can also take and look at the amount of space top and bottom. The centering's great. The edges to this card is looking also pretty good. The edges, the corners is looking great, the centering's looking good, and the surface is looking good. So this card, it will essentially help make the money back that we have on those other cards. This card has a very high likelihood, I think, of getting the 9.5, possibly even a 10. So whenever we have something that's in the high likely range of scoring really well, you're able to make money back on cards that maybe didn't score really well. So the back of this card, you can kind of tell that centering's looking really good. This might go in between 9.5 and 10. And then, essentially this card, the 1990 Fleer, has really been skyrocketing in price. So these hoops may also be going up as well. The junk wax era, for several years, almost a decade or so, they haven't really been a hot commodity. But once the modern cards started to become such I would say a hot commodity, once the modern day cards had such a large demand, these junk wax cards had a kind of a revival. The demand in them went up drastically once individuals were not as easily able to obtain the modern day cards. These junk wax cards were starting to get bought up. So whenever I saw that shift in demand, I instantly started investing there. This card, I'm really happy to say that I would think that this might be our second 9.5. Possibly even 10. In the comments, please let me know what you think. But essentially, I think this card could go in our 9.5 and the 10 range. That's a really good looking surface. I don't see any surface flaws. Edges look flawless, so I'm hoping that they would even consider that for 4 subgrades of 9.5, possibly even consider that with some subgrades at 10. So whenever you get cards like that, it is kind of saves you on when you have other cards in the batch that you send out. And you know what, I could just send that card by itself and reduce my profit cost margin. But I like doing these kind of videos with an audience, having 16 cards to review, giving the audience kind of a thorough, detailed way of looking at how the card may or may not grade out. So I will make the investment on those other hologram cards, even though you can kind of look with me and see that maybe it might not be as close to perfection as we'd like. So with this card, another great thing is the corners look pristine, the edges look amazing, surface is looking great. Now, one thing you might have seen if you start to visualize the centering here, the centering is less than perfect, obviously, right? So we can see a far greater amount of white space on the left side compared to the right side. Now, the amount of space between the top and bottom does look pretty accurate, so that's good. If you have variance in the spacing between top, bottom, and left and right, they're going to definitely want to give you in between, an 8.5 and 9 for your centering. And when Beckett knocks you down for centering, you could have, a great surface, great edges, great corners. But if they spot that flaw on the centering, then it can drastically knock you down. So one other imperfection I kind of see about this card is on the edge. Let's see if you can, yep, you can kind of see it there. So the edge on this card does have an imperfection. I wouldn't say it's a major imperfection, but it does have a imperfection. We can kind of see there on the left side. Surface is looking great, so I can consider that a 9.5 surface. The edges with this top piece, I would kind of look at that as a 9. Corners are looking like they could come out at a 9.5, and the centering would probably be an 8.5 to a 9. So overall, this card would probably go for a 9. I could see it selling out on eBay for around $30. So that previous card is in between 9.5 and 10. It might go for 150. This card's closer to 30. And I do see a little surface flaw. So this is closer to an 8.5 and a 9. So it might be around a $20 sale. So we might just break even after we do our grading cost. So right now, with that first card being around 150, us being just a little under on those other cards, we're probably around $50 in profit right now, after just looking at the first 7 cards. So that's, hypothetically $50 in profit, which would be, obviously I consider myself an optimistic. So we might be less, we might be more. You never know. This next card, again, it's the 1991 Fleer. The centering's a little better on this one than that last one. Top to bottom, looking pretty good. There might be even a little additional space at the bottom. Looking from left to right, that's pretty close. So I would say the centering on this one's probably a 9, maybe a 9.5 if we're lucky. The surface looks better than the last one, so I'm saying around 9.5 on the surface for this one. The edges is looking 9.5, possibly a 9, but I don't see, if we maybe underneath a microscope, they might see something I'm not seeing. As well as corners, I'm seeing good looking corners, 9.5. So really, this card could go in between a 9 and 9.5. Hopefully we get around 3 to 4 subgrades in 9.5. There might be one subgrade at a 9. So let's say this card sells for $100. We would now be up around $75 to $100 in profit. I would say $75. I'd say right now we have around 3 9.5s, and after grading costs, we're probably close to $75 in profit. We'll take another look at a 1991 card. What we'll see here is the surface on this one looking pretty good. I don't see any flaws on the surface. Oh, no, I do see slight flaws on the surface. So that mark it down to an 8.5, possibly a 9 if we're lucky. I do kind of visually see flaws even without a microscope. So this card, 8.5, let's just be kind and say 9 on the surface. Let's say the centering gets, let's be kind and say, obviously there's more white space on that left side. The top to bottom looks about right. Let's say a 9 on, let's say a 9 on centering. Corners, I also would probably give around a 9. We'd be lucky if they do a 9.5. And edges, I would say the edges would be a 9.5. So one subgrade of the edges being 9.5 and the other 3 being 9s. So this card probably break even. So I consider that one a 9. So right now we're sitting around maybe 2, possibly 3, 9.5. Even maybe there was one hoops in there that could be up to a 10. So we're sitting, we've looked at 9 cards. Out of those 9, we have about 3 that are leaning towards 9.5s. We have another one here of the 1990, 1991 hoops. Centering's looking a little better on this one. This card looks like it could go for a 9.5. I do see a little piece of debris on the surface there. So what we're possibly seeing here is a 9.5. So I would say that out of the first 10, there's a good chance that we have around 3 to 4 9.5s. In the comment section, feel free to leave your feedback on what you think these first 10 might grade out at. But yeah, I think that we have around 3 to 4. And, hypothetically, let's say this card goes for 120, and then we have a $30 grading cost. So that would be, let's see if this is part of the surface or if it's on there. So this is part of the surface. That might make down the subgrade of the surface down to a 9. That's still pretty beautiful. So it might be 9.5. But let's just say the card grades out at 120, sells out at 120. Then we are now sitting at 90 after grading, 90 plus 75, which is around 160. So that's 160, potentially would even go down a little bit to 150 in profit after the first 10 cards. So 150, again, think about eBay's 10% cut that they would most likely get. So that takes it down to around 135. So 135 after the first 10 cards. There is time that's involved. There's an 8-month wait. There is shipping cost that goes along with it that would be around $15 FedEx. So that 135 minus that would be 120. So if I just sent these off, I would potentially be looking at 120 in profit with the current prices that's being sold on eBay. So that's, $120 is pretty good. Now, I did own some of those hoops cards. That's why they're in a little bit better condition. I didn't buy them from a secondhand store. But we have another group, I believe 4 of these. What year is this? This is 1992, 1993. Yeah, 1992, 1993. And you can already see this edge here, right there. That's a little bit of imperfection, but 1992, 1993 top stadium. So I can already start to say that the edge on this one is close to a 9. It really does, it might even be an 8.5. That top kind of line of this card does have some flaws to it. I'm never going to overestimate. I always try to be accurate here. So let's just say 8.5 on the subgrade for the edges. The corners look pretty pristine. I've looked at some of the centering on the Stadium Club, and you can kind of tell between the top and bottom. You can get either between an eighth of an inch, most likely. I don't believe that'd be anywhere near a quarter inch, but an eighth of an inch from top to bottom. Whenever you can also sometimes look at other examples and count the amount of pieces of the net that's over. You can kind of look at individuals' body limbs. If there's a lot showing, a little showing from left to right. So hypothetically, let's say that the centering on this one is ideal. Let's just say that the only thing pulling this down would be the edge on the top. Let's say that this gets 3 9.5s and an 8.5 at the top. That might come out to being a 9 on this card. With $30 and grading, this card might just break even. It might go up to 50. We may, let's just say, make $10 on this one. So we originally sitting at around 150. So let's just go up to 160 to be fair. And they may not hit me as hard on the edge on that card, but in case they do, let's just say that it's an 8.5. So this card, a little bit better condition, similar. You can actually see more of his foot in this one. So as we look through these 4 cards, we're going to start to see which is the most common piece of sock that's showing on Jordan's left foot to see the difference between the left and right. And that first one, it was less sock, more net. The top to bottom is about the same. The edges and the corners are looking great. Surface is looking great. So the centering could be the only slight issue on this card. So let's just say we get 3 subgrades at 9.5, possibly 1 subgrade at 9 for the centering. Now, as we look at these other 2 92, 93 Stadium Club base cards, we're going to see what's the most common centering. And again, looking at examples on eBay is a great way to be able to see how the card would potentially grade out with specific grading companies. Some might be more lenient, some might be more stringent. So essentially, we're going to take a look at these other 2 examples that we have and see how much of that sock and net is being shown. But this card, it is a high probability of being a 9.5. And that 9.5 for that card could be $150 to $200. So let's just be kind and say 120. 120 plus 160, let's take out grading costs first. 120 minus the $30 for grading. 90 plus 160, we're at 250 right now. So 250, and we have, looks like 4 cards left. Let's look at this next 92, 93, and let's look at the centering. Let's take a look and see how that centering looks. This centering, which is interesting, appears to be more aligned with the first card that we looked at, with less sock, more net. So, you know, we only have 4 examples here, and we won't be able to see how Beckett would do as an example, but going down eBay, there would be that example. So this looks like an 1/8 inch top to bottom, so that looks pretty good. I think on my left edge here, that subgrade for an edge might go down to an 8.5, might, if we're lucky, 9.5 if they're really being gracious. But, you know, this card, we'll see how the 4th example, how much sock versus net ratio is in the centering. But a lot of these Stadium Club cards also will have, if you look at the back of them really closely, luckily this has a good surface. Whenever these cards were put together in the packs, they kind of stuck together. So you'll sometimes get a little bit more difficult scoring on the surface of these cards because of the, I guess, the texture that the card was used to be made with. Well, this doesn't really help us because now we're 2 for 2 with about the same amount of sock versus net ratio. So I would just go to eBay, see how Beckett has graded out in the centering for these cards with a sock versus net ratio. We're 2 for 2. This is about equal. So 2 of my cards look like they have the same centering. The other 2 look like slightly different. So they may mark that down to a 9. They may mark it down. They may keep it at a 9.5, depending on how bad that centering is. My top to bottom centering look like an 1/8 of an inch each time. So essentially, I think that we're maybe out of these 4. Well, this one potentially has great corners, great surface, great edges. So let's just say 2 out of the 4 of these get the 9.5. So then we were saying in the first 10, we had 3 to 4, then plus 2. So let's just say right now, roughly we have around 5, maybe 6 cards out of our 14 that will be grading out at a 9.5 and above. So we were at 250 after grading costs. Say we just added another $90 card. That's 340 that we are getting back in profit. Now, I did buy each of those cards for $5 a piece, and I actually pulled 1 or 2 from packs that I bought from a box. So let's just say $7 a card. times 5 or 4, 7 times 4. Let's just round it up to 30. We were saying we were close to, what was that? 260 plus 90, 350 minus 30, 320. So that I do want to keep in account if you buy the card raw or if you buy it from a pack or a box, 320 is still a decent return on investment. And that's including those first 5 hologram cards that kind of weighing us down a little bit. But also, I will note that I will give out free cards with each of my purchases. It may be an entire pack of cards. It may be kind of a set of cards that I give away. But for the first, I believe we've looked at 14. I think if you want to make your estimates, right now I see 5 to 6 9.5s. We have 2 left here. And we will start with this upper deck season leaders. This is a 93, 94. And I really like this card because I have some for my personal collection from when I was collecting as a kid. And whenever I was collecting, I dented the edges and the corners, just wanting to pull the card out, wanting to look at it. That decreased the value in my personal collection cards. So whenever I was at the store and I saw this card in a little bit better condition, just the sheer fact that I had collected it, but I had not kept it in great condition over the years, kind of propelled me to want to buy it. So I think the surface is looking good. I noticed that the corners and the edges to this card look good. The centering would be, there's might be a slight flaw on the edge there. So let's just say we get 3 subgrades at 9.5 and 1 at a 9. The centering might be a little off, but it also could be dead on. So let's just say 3 subgrades at 9.5. This card, let's just hypothetically say $60 card, and then after grading, we add the 30 back. So I think we were at 320, now we're back up to 350. This final card, I love it. I had some other cards from this collection. This is an upper deck. Is this 90, 93, 94? What's really cool about this, and you've probably already seen this over here, I don't think this is going to work, but I would love to kind of play around with the camera because I think we're supposed to have kind of both of these. Yeah, that's not going to work. But whenever you, growing up, you would put these essential kind of 3D glasses on. This was before 3D as far as the Oculus and other kind of mainstream 3D in modern day. This would have a pop and look to it that if you have it on both eyes, it would kind of have a 3-dimensional look and feel to the card. So I had other cards from this collection, and I didn't have the Jordan. So whenever I was in the secondhand store recently, I really liked the look of this card. I like the quality of it. And I think the population count to it will be ideal. So I don't think too many people will have this being graded. Maybe they do, but I just haven't seen it around the auctions as much. I will say that in the top left corner, there may be a slight imperfection on the corner. But besides from that, the surface looks really good. The edges look really good. The centering, it looks like there's a little bit more room top to bottom. Looks like there's a little bit less room on the left, a little more room on the right. So I would consider this 1 subgrade for the corner being 9, 1 subgrade for the centering being 9, and the surface and the edges each being 9.5. So, it could be between 9 and 9.5. I'll just say we break even on this card and make it easy and say it's either a 9 or 9.5. I think that'll be fun. So we're in between 6 and 7 for me. My ongoing score would be 6 or 7. And what we would do is essentially in the comment section, if you're wanting to play along, you can make your predictions. Sub to the channel. We're going to have some other sports cards, mainly basketball cards, kind of videos coming up. We'll also have some e-learning. We'll have a various kind of videos coming up. But if you want to stick to the channel, put your comment in. I will follow up once we get to that point and let people know if they've won. If we get more than one person with the same score, same comment, I will put them in a random drawing and then select their name from that. So another thing I want to look at real quick is how I send my cards off to the grading companies. And this is a card saver 1 and a penny sleeve. So I will essentially put these cards back in these kind of plastic wrap. I will put together around 16. Sometimes I go 15. You can put however many cards you want to, whatever you're comfortable with. I will put the cards, I have like a piece of cardboard that I put underneath the cards, and then I have another piece of cardboard very similar to this on top. I will tape it shut, and I will use the FedEx wrapping. They have kind of a bubble mailer. I'll use that to ship the cards off. So we already kind of included the cost of shipping. There will be a return cost for shipping as well, so we can maybe mark our potential profit margin down to, let's say, 320 all the way up to potentially 400. So from the cards that we bought from a second store, we got graded, we'll need to wait. So essentially that investment may even go up. The 75th anniversary of the NBA is going to be coming up almost by the time we get these cards back. So I think that's kind of exciting that, potentially these cards will go on the market. Most likely they will. These cards will go on the market once that 75th anniversary really starts to kick into high gear. And these Jordan cards will be definitely in higher demand. He is most likely going to be the number one 75th of all time. They're going to do 75 basketball players of all time. Most likely he'll be near number one, and most likely number one from the if you go online and see the different kind of ways that they poll the top players. It looks like Jordan's number one, and then it could be either Kareem or LeBron being number two. There's a long list you can check out. I'll have some Shaq rookies going up as well. I think he's number 7. So yeah, basketball's fun. This is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to help educate viewers. So if you do want to be a part of the contest, the 2 dirt cards that I have, again, they're 2016, 2017 Revolution Dirk Nowitzki cards. They'll be just given out. I will contact the individual that wins the comments. Let's say if there's more than one, I will put them in a drawing, put the person's name, mix up the names, draw out a name, be very fair. You can go to I'll put a link to my eBay as well as my Mercari page in the description. What you'll be able to see is how people have responded with feedback in both of these pages. You'll be able to see that, I do my best to give back to the sports card community. And these dirt cards, one's a base and one's either kind of like an insert from that Revolution. It's not numbered. It's just, I wouldn't say these are extremely high dollar cards, but it is fun if you want to play along. If you don't, you just want to watch the video and kind of get an idea in your head on how I did my grading, then you can just kind of work through on how I did my grading and see if that will help educate you in your grading. But again, I'm not a professional grader. I'm not a professional investor. I'm just an individual that wants to help educate other people. And whenever I do that, I hope that, helps the greater good. So I do appreciate everyone watching today. It's been a little bit longer video. Hopefully you have ads turned off on your YouTube that only cost $10 a month. I'll do more videos like this. This is the 25th submission of cards. I'll have 26 coming up soon. And then we'll start getting those early submissions back from Beckett in the near future. And once we get those back, we'll be able to take a look at those as kind of the after. I didn't get a before on those first several submissions, but moving forward, I do like to get the before in. I do like to go over how these athletes, how these cards have different value. So I do appreciate your time. I do appreciate you watching. And again, if you want to leave a comment below with how many cards you think that will grade out at 9.5 or above, I will take those comments into consideration once these cards are returned. Essentially, we're in the middle of February right now, so the return date I would assume would be like January 2022 is my guess right now. Maybe Beckett will get a lull and they'll be able to start turning cards out quicker. But right now I'm guessing if you put a comment in, in the back of your mind, throw something on your Google Calendar, check back on this channel, to be able, or definitely keep the same YouTube account so I can message you. But yeah, just go ahead and have fun with it. I appreciate your time, and you have a great day.